Everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Meg Sheehan. I'm a coordinator of the Community Land and Water Coalition. Our mission is to preserve, protect, and steward our finite, unique land and water resources because we're losing them fast here in southeastern Mass. We are a network of groups and individuals. Our network includes some of the leading conservation groups in the region, as well as our Wampanoag allies. The Atlantic Coastal Pine Barrens ecoregion, shown here on the map in red, and also to protect our waterways, surface water and groundwater, including the Plymouth Carver sole source aquifer. And the topic of our webinar tonight is the Wareham rezoning proposal. Is it a boon or a bust for the community? This project will have economic, environmental, and social impacts throughout our region, and so it is a concern to our regional land and water coalition. Our guest this evening is Dr. Jennings, and with no further ado, I will let Mr. Jennings introduce himself and start off with the first question. To talk a little bit about your background in economics and how you've come to study ecological issues.
Good evening, and thanks for coming. I'm Fred Jennings, and I live in Ipswich. I have a BA in economics with high honors from Harvard College, and my economics PhD is from Stanford University. And my interest in ecological issues really comes from my research, which over the last 40 years or so, I've been working on developing a concept of planning horizons and its economic implications, which focuses on the difference between larger perspectives, call it conscience, and myopic concerns, and the economic differences of those two approaches to decisions. The reason this is of interest to me is because ecological issues are mostly about enduring long-term effects, while economic motives are too often focused on short-term motives and immediate results at the cost of long-term effects. So that's really where my interest in ecological economics originates.
And what do economists mean when they talk about a negative externality? Are there any negative externalities associated with the proposed plan to rezone almost 750 acres in Wareham?
Well, this is actually a nice connection to the difference between myopic and long-range decisions. Because myopic concerns set in motion enduring consequences. And they're often those consequences, if the decision that's made on a myopic basis, those consequences aren't taken into account. And economists often call those externalities because they were external to the decision as it was made. But all human-caused ecological impacts are really of this sort. But my problem with the concept is that we live in a totally interconnected world where externalities are really always present. So it's somewhat discomforting to basically ignore externalities as if they don't exist. And this Wareham rezoning issue is really of that sort. My impression from reading the documents that I reviewed for my report was that the notice group letters and their supporters have put out this urgent appeal for this development opportunity, and they use this development opportunity phrase again and again, and that we ought to do this rezoning before and do this development before any other community gets it. And I've done a lot of work in fisheries management, and this sounds an awful lot like the race for fish, and we know how that turns out. And the point is that this sort of myopic rush to decision tends to ignore ecological issues and crowd them out, and crowd out the sort of a more deliberate decision based on these larger long-term consequences. It also, I think, is of great concern after doing a careful review of the Wareham land use planning documents that are all over the Wareham town website, that they're all about open space and conservation of land and ecological resources, and all that seems to have been conveniently ignored in this push for rezoning. So that's also a big concern.
So just to give a little bit of background here, the rezoning proposal involves 750 acres more or less in Wareham, and it was originally proposed by a group called the Notos Group, and they were originally looking to put in a horse track and a casino and other commercial development, building out what is now a very green area adjacent to very important conservation land, the Red Brook Conservation Area. As part of the process, there were a number of studies that were done. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about the studies and then tell us about your analysis.
Yeah, you're coming in and out, Meg, but I got the gist of your question. Yeah, I was retained by Trout Unlimited to basically take a look at both the documents that make the economic argument that I'll review in a minute, that were done by FXM Associates out of Mattapoisett under contract with the Notos Group. And I also looked at the Wareham town planning documents because I thought that sort of set the whole issue in a context that it belongs in. So really, my analysis had two main parts. One was looking at the FXM Associates analysis and both explaining what they did and then criticizing it. And then looking at the town planning, land use planning documents and basically reporting on what their contents were. But let me talk a little about the FXM Associates analysis. I've found basically what they argue and what the supporters to this this plan have basically argued is that given the current residential zoning of this, basically the 275 acres within this 750 acre area that they want to rezone, given the residential zoning, that if that land is used for residential purposes, according to FXM Associates, it will cost the town in net revenue losses of about the amount of $800,000 a year. And this is based on a series of assumptions about the number of people per home, per new home and the value of the new homes and the number of students in each of these new homes, and how that the costs of to the town of residential use of this land are going to far exceed the tax revenue base. So I looked at that argument, and I've done a lot of economic litigation work. And in that context, whatever you do is going to be closely scrutinized. So I'm sort of used to dealing with economic analyses that are done pretty carefully. And maybe I'll just leave it there. This one is rather different from that, and I was rather surprised. But let me go through a few of their assumptions. I am told that you can't put 90 homes on a 275-acre plot that is zoned for 3 acres and have room for roads and other installations. So, and it's not an area of my expertise, but I was assured that that was not correct. But that's a relatively minor point. A more serious point is that FXM based the value of those new homes in a nice wooded area on the average value of homes in Wareham. Now, Wareham is not all homes in nice wooded areas. There are some blighted areas and there are a lot of deteriorated houses. You don't base the value of new homes on the current value of old homes. There were 2 comparable home sales up there in that area that I was informed of, and I've done a recalculation based on that. FXM Associates also based their estimate of both the schooling and service costs to Wareham, the municipal costs and the schooling costs, on the average cost per student and on the average costs incurred for municipal services by residents. Now, scaling up those costs on the basis of the average cost per person in each of those contexts assumes that all costs are variable, that there are no fixed costs in the system. And that's a really, I think, a fairly astonishing assumption when you have buildings and maintenance and people who are employed that are not, their numbers or their costs are not responsive to the number of students or the number of users. So there are fixed costs in the system, and they're significant. Also using the average cost per student, given that there are fixed costs in the system, that number is higher because if student enrollments have been falling, and the Wareham Master Plan reported that student enrollments had fallen significantly by over 30% in the 10 years between 2007 and 2017. So given those fixed costs, that bulks up the average cost per student quite a lot, and COVID-19 has certainly exacerbated that issue. So using this average cost per student as their basis for the cost measure is doubly inflated. Finally, they used inflated numbers of the numbers of residents per home as well. Now, if I may share my screen, I did a sort of rough recalculation based on their numbers or on what I think are reasonable numbers. on what the implications would be. And let me share that screen. Okay, can you see that? Is that coming across out there? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, the first line is their argument. And they assumed there would be 4.5 residents per home and 0.93 students per home, and that the value of those homes would be about $350,000,
Okay.
and that there are no fixed costs. And they come up with a number that I can't derive from their figures because it doesn't calculate, but it's in the ballpark. But they say that the town will lose $800,000 a year on if that land is used for residential purposes. And that's why, you know, we ought to develop it into this small city, because that will save Wareham that loss. All right, so I took they had two drafts of this, or two versions of this housing argument. And the first one was in November, and the second one was in early December. And in the one in November, they had, and I quote this in the report, but they had when they talked about the 4.5 residents per home and 0.93 students per home, which they drew from what they said was their own data, internal. They also had this line that said, well, actually in 2020, there were 2.41 residents per home, and there were only 0.27 students per home in Wareham in that time period. In the second version, that sentence mysteriously disappeared. Well, if you take that number, which is their number, and you don't change anything else, that 800,000 disappears, and the loss turns into a gain of about 100,000 a year. All right, and then okay, taking those numbers and leave them as they are, there were two comparable sales of homes up in that area that I was informed about. One of them was for about, well, I can actually tell you, this is my report. Yes, right here. One of them was sold for, or assessed at 526,400, and the other was assessed at 605,800. And they were both up in Glen Charlie Road, directly adjacent to that parcel. All right, so let's so I took the average of those two comparable properties and inserted that for the 350,000, and that kicks the net revenues up to about a little over 300,000 a year. But you know, this no fixed cost assumption is really, you know, probably the most inexcusable oversight. So I took two possible levels of fixed cost, because I think that I don't know, because I haven't looked at the school budgets or the municipal budgets. To do it properly, you'd have to do that and kind of think about it. But I think it is probable that the fixed costs in the school system are at least 75%, and maybe as high as 90%, and in municipal services as well, although that's a much smaller number, so it's not really.
Well, I hate to interject, but do you Fred, and I'm sorry for getting in late, and I really am. Apparently my internet's not working as well as I hoped it would be.
Yeah.
Fred, I admired your report, and I was wondering if you could talk a bit about you know, economists often talk about negative externalities and things that, are
Yeah,
bad things.
oh, Ben, excuse me, we're at the end of question 3 in this list. And
Oh, okay.
I'm kind of finishing up my FXM thing, so I
Well,
didn't.
not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Oh, okay. Let me just finish that up, and then we can go to the one that you wanted was question 4, I think. But anyway, so if you basically assume fixed costs of 75% in both the schooling and the municipal services, you get up to about $940,000 gain. So we've now moved from a loss of 800,000 to a gain of almost $1 million. And if you assume 90% fixed costs, you're over $1 million. So, the point is that, if you move these assumptions in the direction of reality, this $800,000 loss that they've been bandying about in support of this rezoning project disappears and evaporates into a gain. And I'll leave it there. I mean, to me, that's really a pretty persuasive point. We do have a hand raised.
So this is Meg, and I'd just like to summarize and tie that back to the vote. So voting no on question 1, no to rezoning, will actually save the town $1 million. Is that what you're saying is a possibility?
Well, that basically leaving this in its current zoning will basically, and if the land is developed for residential purposes, it will probably generate $1 million of revenues in excess of what it's going to cost the town. I think that's the way to express it.
So what you're saying then, you forgive me, Fred, is that it will not actually be an economic benefit to the town to rezone. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure that what I'm debunking is the argument they made that the residential use of this land was going to be a loss to the town. Part of the problem, Ben, with this proposal, with this rezoning proposal, is that it's a blank check. There's no information on how they're going to develop it. So
I think that's kind of what Meg is saying, actually, right? That we can't be sure.
Well, you know a little about the Notos Group from the 2 projects they did in Quincy, the Marina Bay and the Granite Links. That they're a big player, and they do big projects, and I think you can be pretty sure that this is going to be a big project, and that it's going to really change the character of the town of Wareham in a significant way if it's approved. But my argument is that this claim that the current zoning arrangement is going to be a loss to the town is a completely bogus argument.
Okay, all right.
I can't speculate on what the consequences are of a completely undefined development project that is a blank check. I mean, who knows?
Right. But
it's going to make some money for the Notos Group. Whether it benefits the town or not is, I think, an unanswerable question at this point.
I think, I'm sorry, but I think you kind of buried the lead if that's the case. That this won't actually, like, there's no like everything you said, and why don't we just say what you said?
Well, the next question that, as I understood it, you were going to ask was focused on the ecological impact of this development project. And I think that, the argument that should be made here is that, the losses are not necessarily viewed properly if we look at them through just a financial lens. I think the losses that are involved are ecological losses. And there, I think the whole issue of Red Brook, the endangered species in the Pine Barrens, and most importantly, the aquifer that is sitting underneath sandy and gravelly soil that infiltrates very readily, such that anything that is a contaminant that goes into that soil is going to go straight into the aquifer. And the town planning documents make very clear that the aquifer doesn't just stay in one place. There's lots of flowing water in there, so that any contamination goes very far out.
Can I interrupt you for a second, Fred? I apologize. One of the arguments that we've seen is that, well, it's just the aquifer, which not an argument I endorse. That Nora Bickey, whom I don't actually know very well, has said that, she says that, well, we're going to do this, and it's going to be away and adjacent from the aquifer. But don't you think that that's incorrect?
That aquifer, well, if you look at the map that Meg put up, and Meg, maybe you should put that up again.
Well, Meg's doing enough, I think.
That aquifer is basically 200 square miles and is the entire, the whole area, the whole region.
Yeah.
And it's one of the biggest aquifers in New England.
Yeah.
It's this whole area.
Yeah.
And that is an absolutely precious and irreplaceable resource that you just don't mess around with, because it's the source of clean, fresh drinking water for the whole region, and certainly for Wareham. And it's and given the nature of the soils, I mean, this is all stuff that's laid out very clearly in the open space plan and in the hazard mitigation plan, and even in the master plan. They make very clear.
I can't mute my computer, so I can't talk with you without them hearing me.
Well, we did hear it. But that
okay.
whole aquifer is something which, all of the town planning documents are basically talk about how sensitive and vulnerable this aquifer is, and how important it is not to screw it up.
Right. And so, my argument or my concern is that there are people out there, Fred, who are saying, which I think is totally incorrect, and I think you are right in saying it's incorrect. There are, I will say her name. Her name is Nora Bickey. She is saying that it doesn't, basically doesn't matter, which I think is, incorrect and wrong. And I wonder how we
that the aquifer doesn't.
How we argue against that in a very concise way.
Well, I think all you got to do is take a look at the town planning documents to completely dismiss that argument, because the whole town planning documents all talk in great detail about how important that aquifer is and how vulnerable it is to contamination.
Yeah. I have actually done that,
Oh.
and I have spoken with her privately and said, look, I think that you're wrong, and I think you're dangerously wrong, and you know, I do think that there are all these kinds of pro-development people that we have to understand that are just really, I don't want to say bad, but they're opposed to us, and I think we have to.
Well, it makes me think of Upton Sinclair's.
So, folks, can I just step in for a minute?
Please.
Ed, if you're familiar with Ed Persavich, he has been involved in the town for
Yes.
years, and he's focusing on this aquifer. He's sitting in on the selectmen's meeting right now, which is why he's not in this meeting. And that was him, and I'm sorry for interrupting everyone. That was him calling in. He said Mrs. Whiteside, said in the selectmen's meeting that the aquifer was under the whole town, and all the sewage was aligned with the aquifer, and no one had to worry about the aquifer. He's sitting in the middle of the selectmen's meeting, and that's what was being said right now.
Well, they said that, or he said that.
Whiteside. Who's Whiteside? Miss Whiteside?
All right, so just to put a little structure on our webinar, we did allot 30 minutes for Fred's presentation, and we're wrapping up. And I'd like to turn it over to any questions and answers. If anyone has a question, I see there is one question here in the audience. Someone has their hand raised, and that is Tricia, I believe. Did you have a question, Tricia?
You're muted, Tricia.
Yes.
It keeps muting itself.
And there's also a question.
It's probably telling me I should shut up.
No.
And we also have could everyone introduce themselves when they speak, please?
So I'm Tricia Wirtz. I'm a resident of Wareham, and I'm a full-time resident just for the past 2 years, but I've had homes here for over 25 years. I was raising my hand at the time because Ed had said to make sure that everyone knew that not only should we be worried about the aquifer, it is the only option for drinking water for us. There's no other option if this gets messed up. And meanwhile, he's listening to the selectmen's meeting and saying information that's going into the selectmen's meeting and presented right now is totally opposite of what the situation is. That's it.
Right. Thank you. And I have a question here in the chat box. And that is, has anyone calculated how much it will cost to build a water filtration plant if Wareham loses the natural recharge of the sole source aquifer when it rezones? Fred or Ben, would you like to take that question?
Fred, do you want to?
I have no real expertise on that question. My own sense is that unless you're going to start desalinating salt water, that your aquifer is what you got, and it's part of the reason why all of these Wareham planning documents are so insistent that this aquifer needs to be studiously protected because it's not replaceable.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Well, David Halberstad had a question some time ago. I don't know whether he still does.
David, did you have a question?
Howard Randall.
I did. I live over in Onset, and I'm an Onset water commissioner. And given some of the other questions that have come up, strangely, I'm also a town of Wareham assessor. So given those two hats, among others, the onset water commissioners, although we have not come out one way or the other, because whether you put houses up or you put some other type of development, which is unknown, our perspective is we have sort of a fiduciary responsibility to protect the onset water supply. And our wells are maybe 1,000 feet from this development. And because we're not Wareham, as far as anyone who's done any of the discussions at the town level or with the town, they've never even contacted us until tonight. I sort of lambasted the attorney last night in the planning board meeting, and he actually around 5 o'clock tonight sent me a text or an email saying, gee, why don't we get together and chat? And, you know, for this week, it's a little late, but, you know, I think the major concern, and I have not looked at your report, although listening to you talk about it, I find exceptionally interesting. You know, there's some major infrastructure issues, no matter what gets done, that the town probably can't afford without somebody ponying up the money. And that would, we have a sewer system that's at capacity. And if you put 90 houses on it or some racetrack casino type of thing, that's a major issue that the town is probably looking for a way of getting that expanded. I don't know, I haven't been involved with those discussions. But I'm surprised that there's been so little discussion about, excuse me one sec. That went away. I haven't heard a lot of talking about how some of the ecologically focused groups, Buzzards Bay Coalition and you name it, some of you are, you know, members or involved with those groups, why there hasn't been trying to get together and pull together resources and just take this land and keep it as a open space, untouched, clean up the areas that have been decimated by the gravel company and the pig farms and stuff like that. But there's so little talk about doing something constructive. And for something, and I will admit I've come late to the party, but I hear everybody talking about minutia of a given proposal, or we don't know what the proposal is and how do we fight it. And you've got Judy Whiteside giving bad information at the selectmen's meeting. But the only way we can stop some type of development and protect this land is to get groups together to, you know, buy it, take it off the market and get rid of all these commercial developments. And if we don't do that, we're just blowing in the wind, because maybe this group won't get it, but some other group will come in with the resources and they'll come up with some other commercial or housing type of set of structures, and we'll always be tilting at windmills. And I think we should maybe find a way to focus on how to do a constructive, get rid of the development by finding ways of getting the funding to clean up the land and keep it pristine. And I say that as one of the onset water commissioners, not speaking for the board, but for myself. I just think there's a lot of discussion on things that aren't going to make any difference. The difference to us is, do we have to go to court to protect the aquifer and the water for 3,200 households in onset? You know, and it's separate from Wareham, and because it's separate from Wareham, nobody's talked to us for the 2 years while this is going on. So,
Well, David, if I may
Well,
bust in here, David, you raise a good point, and in fact, the Fish and Wildlife bought and protected the land at the headwaters of Red Brook in that way. And I think there has been some discussion about trying to get a group of people together or a group of organizations together to try to protect this other land. But I think we all came a little bit late to the party in terms of being able to get something like that going quickly.
Yeah, this is Howard Randall. A couple of points. All those are good ideas, but it's interesting. I think if you read the preamble to a planning board's enabling legislation, they're the ones that are supposed to be looking at these critical resources and protecting them through zoning if they can. I've been involved in saving land, and I don't know whether any of these parcels are in chapter and therefore have to be offered to the town first. I know nothing about the ownership of the various parcels involved, but I would think it would be in the interest of the 6 communities, now that the subjects come up, that have straws into this aquifer, that we might do something collective to try to save it. On the issue of the financial numbers, Fred, who's going to articulate that and how at town meeting?
So I am actually curious about that, because I have taken on this, even though I have this actually terrible flu, which is apparently you can still get the flu in COVID time. It's horrible, but I was wondering, like, could we get like a general who is speaking and what are the points they're making. I have had that from some people, but I have not had it from other people who I know are in Wareham. So I don't I would like to proceed on that ground.
Mhm.
Even though I have the flu and I feel horrible, but I'm going to try to, go along.
Do we know if your analysis, Fred, has been put before the Finance Committee or the Board of Selectmen, so that somebody could make reference to it and ask them if they've read it?
Well, Meg probably can answer this better than I, but my understanding is that it was that it has been put before or at least into the documents that have gone to the planning board, but I don't know. I did the report and have distributed it as widely as I've been able to, and
Mhm.
I think it's up to the other people to basically take it where it needs to go.
Yeah.
Right. I think, that there are, things that some people don't like in your report, but that's fine. I think that we should actually just like use the report and like use everything we got now, to throw it against, the wall, basically. And I actually think we're winning, frankly. I mean, that's my sense.
I hope you're right.
Well, thanks.
Okay. So any questions, any more questions from the audience?
I would just caution, Meg, that I don't know of the people voting, how many will understand the fixed cost argument. I think it's a wonderful argument, but I don't know how that can easily be explained to a town meeting group, but the fact is that liars can figure and figures can lie is what I think you want to portray, and that there's a well-respected economist who finds great fault with this report, and to the effect that Wareham may very well benefit from 700 to 1,000 to $1 million positive gain in the build out of housing.
I have a
Exactly.
question.
You want,
I'm sorry.
yeah, we want to just remind them that there's been an independent economic study that shows the opposite of their numbers. However, again, people need to articulate,
Mm.
you know, that actually do not show a decrease in or an increase in cost, but rather a net gain of close to 900,000 to $1 million. Whether you say that or not, but that's the big picture.
Excellent summary. Thank you. Is there another question?
Yes,
Yeah,
I have a question.
Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, my question is whether or not we know yet if it's going to be a vote by a simple majority, or is it going to be 2/3 is generally the case with zoning articles.
I understand that that decision will be made tomorrow evening by the planning board.
Okay, thank you, Meg.
Oh, I'm sorry, Thursday evening.
Yeah,
2 days before the vote? Wow.
yeah.
That's correct.
That's only if they get something back from the state.
Mhm.
They were hoping to do it before the meeting. They were hoping to do it last night, but there were a couple of the members who didn't feel comfortable until the state had given their opinion.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Any other questions?
yeah, my question is, does this seem to members of this discussion that have been through similar or like types of processes with various other town meetings, does it seem to people that this process is being compressed and ramrodded through, or is that just me that has that impression?
No, from 30 years in public life, I find it strange that this would find its way onto a special town meeting, and the fact that those can be packed, and what's the urgency? Why can't it go on a regular town meeting?
Well, Jeff, if you read both the Toccio letter and the letter that the notice group sent out to the whole neighborhood, all of the Wareham residents, that certainly conveys a sense of urgency about grabbing this opportunity before some other community does.
Well, the other question, and I'll make this very quick, is it also rather unusual to not invite people in from different perspectives to meet in front of the town to have this kind of a discussion in front of everybody? Is that not a common thing that is done in this kind of situation?
Well, certainly for getting something on the warrant, that can be done through petition. I find it strange that it came in this way, through notice to the selectmen, or maybe it came through the planning department. But the Mass General laws, as it relates to zoning change, provides some level of protection in that the planning board is required to hold public hearings on zoning changes. So, and in fact, they seem to understand that a bit in the fact that the notice or the content of the warrant article changed significantly, and the state law says that if it changes significantly, they need to rehear it. And it also says if they rehear it within 10 days of the town meeting, I believe it is, they have to provide a report to the town meeting of their vote or whatever. So that's the protection you have. What bothers me is that these issues many of them are fact-based and technical in nature, and that expert witnesses, the way I understand your town meeting, people get to talk for 2 minutes, and then if you say what the other guy said or close to what the other guy said, then you're gavelled down and told that we've already heard that. And this is so complex.
Look, I apologize. I have the flu, so I have to go. I have to go
Yep.
sleep. I apologize.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Better.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks.
No, the rush, I don't understand. I read the notice in the Wareham paper, their local paper, from the head of Nodos, how they're a nice family. And I don't know that nice people get involved in destroying 200 or 300 acres of critical world-class forest. I don't know. Maybe that's nice is defined in some other way by them. And that if some other developer, there are worse people than us that might come along and do whatever. The underlying zoning is what it is. And if other people come along, that's what they're probably going to do, what's allowed in that district and under your present zoning. So these guys are coming in saying, we have a different vision, but guess what? We need an overlay district in order to allow, because your current zoning won't allow it. You know.
Well, ecological losses never do well in an environment that is populated by myopic concerns.
No. Yeah.
And that's that was one of your points. I think we had a question from Trish.
Just going back to and I'm new into this as well and trying to understand how everything works. Supposedly, I looked at the warrant. Fred, you asked me to look to see what laws or citations were in there. There was almost nothing. I spent 2 days looking at it, and some of it read like HGTV general guide. Other parts of it were totally false. And there were other parts with questions. And Meg and I brought up 2 issues and presented them to Meg. First of all, I'm only full-time here 2 years, but I was full-time in Tampa, Florida for 35 years. And I never saw a development situation where the lawyers for the company who wanted to develop was the people that developed the warrants and the zoning laws for the town. I don't understand how we've ever allowed that to happen. It's a conflict of interest. And as I read those documents, there are a lot of things I didn't agree with, but there are 2 big things that showed up in my mind. And the first is there's no protection in that warrant for the town of Wareham. When it talks about liability, it talks about the fact that if multiple organizations or people contribute their land, which should be contiguous, for one permit against this special rezoning, that if one of those organizations involved defaults, nobody else in any other organization that's part of that whole permit is responsible, and therefore they'll just go on. That means that the town of Wareham is responsible for whatever the heck happens there or doesn't happen there. And I see no recommendation that the town have insurance against liabilities and malformation functions and the potential of bankruptcy or whatever from the developers. There's no protection in this warrant at all. And then the second part was, right now the only access is Glen Charlie Road. It's a little country road. You cannot pass 2 trucks on it at the same time. And the only other way is to go Plymouth Road, which at least half a mile of it is potholes and sandy roads. So you're going to put, when you look at this warrant, it talks about buildings can be at least 80 feet tall. That's 7 to 9 floors. And they could be taller if the planning board allows it. They talk about loading docks, unloading docks, municipality buildings, all sorts of things that tell you, quite frankly, you're going to have a whole separate town there, small city, and you're going to have lots of traffic. So the traffic's not only a problem, but let's face it, we're New England. We have snowstorms, we have hurricanes, we have floods. We even have earthquakes every once in a while. Any type of disaster that happens without the infrastructure, the roading infrastructure being able to handle that development, those people are going to be trapped. They're going to be in trouble. And when I brought it up at the planning board meeting last night, Toshio stepped in and said, well, the roads can be developed. And I said, well, from where? He said, well, they just can be developed. I said, so that means you're going to take other property by eminent domain to develop roads for that. And he said, oh no, but there wasn't an answer. So I've never seen in Tampa, I've never seen a proposal like this where infrastructure support and when it would go in place and who would fund it and how it would happen was never addressed. And I just want to understand how the heck the town let this kind of stuff happen.
Well, I think those are really good questions. We don't have answers. I think the only solution is to vote no on Article 1 to get folks out to show up at town meeting. And if there are no further questions, we'll wrap up the webinar.
Well,
and thank you very much to Fred.
I would have one
Excuse me.
just remark, because I keep thinking of this Joni Mitchell song, and I worry that Wareham may be paving paradise and putting up parking lots when the song went that you don't know what you have till it's gone.
Absolutely, and that's
Beautiful.
what our mission is all about at Community Land and Water Coalition. We're losing it fast. That's part of our mission. We understand that. We see that around us, and this is just one more example of why we really need to mobilize the community, get people out to vote. If you want more information and you want to get a hold of Fred's report and analysis, it is on the website, norezoningwareham.com. You can get in touch with us via email, Environment Watch Southeastern Mass, or get in touch with one of our allies. And if we have no further questions, I'll say goodnight to everyone.
Well, let's be sure that this information gets in the hands or on the table in this decision process, so it gets to the boards that are making these decisions. So at least it's on the record.
Absolutely. And
thank you all.
again, Fred, and thank you everyone for coming. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Night.